And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Welcome to this special Thursday live stream here on Black Box Online Radio. My name is Ned Dahan, also known as Black Box Ned, and I used to do these every Tuesday and Thursday, and somebody left a request on one of the recent episodes to have a return to the live stream, so that's what's brought us here today. And I'm going to be uploading this one a little bit earlier than scheduled, just so I could see how everything looked and sounded, and this is going to be something that I call True Crime on the Phone. In the past, I used to do True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and then True Crime on the Phone was a little bit more of the improvised version. But welcome to number one in this new segment. On Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment about the Black Dahlia every Thursday, and that's what you're listening to now, Dahlia Thursday. But as you see from the title of this episode, this is going to be the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. And that just simply means that I'm going to be talking about anything related to the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia. You can put anything you want in the chat, but comments related to those two subjects will be given priority. And I also want this to be something that is not solely going to focus on a single suspect. When some people think of the Zodiac Killer, Black Dahlia connection, they are immediately going to think about a particular suspect named George Hodel and act like he's the foundation of everything. He's the heart and soul of all of it. Yes, we can talk about George Hodel, but there are other suspects who have been accused of being the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer. For example, Edward Wayne Edwards, Jack Torrance, Frank Morrison, the Lizard People, two off the top of my head. And we have some people coming into the chat now. So if you guys can just let me know if you can hear me okay, see me okay, how's everything on your end? This is True Crime on the Phone, as opposed to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And William Kane is here. Hello, William Kane. And many of you guys might remember from the older live streams, I used to greet you all by saying hello from the Fox with my wonderful Fox mug. Then my fiance knocked him off the table, and the Fox is no longer with us. So today, we are joined by Big Red. Glamorous, right? It's some high-end show business stuff right there. But yes, William Kane, can you hear me okay? And if everybody can hear me, see me, just let me know in the chat. And also, just contribute things about the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia as you see fit. I've been doing the Dahlia Thursday segment here on Black Box Online Radio for about 2.5 months now, almost 3 months, and it is a very confusing mystery, and it's a very difficult mystery to evaluate because there might even be less physical evidence than there is in the Zodiac Killer mystery. Because in the Black Dahlia case, the perpetrator went through some very strong efforts to try and destroy the physical evidence. Whereas with the Zodiac Killer, I don't necessarily think he destroyed the physical evidence. I don't think he left any physical evidence to begin with. Or let's be clear, very, very clear. He put precautionary measures in place to prevent the transfer of physical evidence. The Zodiac knew about things like fingerprints. He didn't touch too many things, so his DNA probably wouldn't be left behind on a lot of stuff. But I posted this on the Black Box Online Radio post page here on YouTube, as well as in a Facebook group called the Zodiac Killer Library, that if you watch any other Zodiac Killer video today, please make it the new one from Dion Walker. His channel is called Dion Walker, Dionwalker. He's a Zodiac researcher from New Zealand, and he posted a fascinating video on the fingerprints in the Zodiac Killer mystery. So, to talk about the suspects, I said I'm going to begin with George Hodel, Edward Wayne Edwards, and Jack Torrance. Some of you might be wondering, is Jack Torrance really a suspect in both the Zodiac Killer mystery and the Black Dahlia Avenger case? And the answer is yes. This is the subject of the book The World According to Jack Torrance by Harriet Suchet. Now, I found that this becomes somewhat of a challenge. George Hodel is one of the oldest Zodiac Killer suspects. He was born in the early 1900s. This date always escapes me. It's 1907, right? So at the start of the Zodiac murders, he would have been 61 years old. Now, that means at the time of the Black Dahlia Avenger crimes, he would have been around 39 years old. Not impossible. And then you guys have perhaps all heard the story from his son, Steve Hodel, that firstly, He found two photos of a woman that looks like Elizabeth Short, and he thought that, oh, let's see what's going on. It turns out my father was the prime suspect in the Black Dahlia mystery. He has these photos of Elizabeth Short, and Steve Odell has gone on to write at least 5 or 6 books at the time of this recording about his father being the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer. Steve Odell has a 2-part series called Avenger and Most Evil. They are an interlocking set of videos and an interlocking set of books and stories that talk about him being his father being the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia Avenger. And we have Thaddeus here saying hello. Hello to you too, Thaddeus. You get some cheers from Big Red today. And I'm going to confess something to you guys that I know you're not supposed to do this, but I'm actually drinking Coke Zero. And I go through these different phases where I want to drink tea all the time. I want to drink coffee all the time. Well, today it's Coke Zero. You're not supposed to do that while you're broadcasting. So don't tell anyone at the FCC that I'm doing this because you're not supposed to. But to continue with the discussions on the Black Dahlia case, there is another widely discussed Zodiac killer suspect out there named Edward Wayne Edwards, and he gets accused of being the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia Avenger. Ed Edwards gets accused of many different crimes, and I decided to pick up his book. Not his book. It's the book that was written about him by John Cameron, It Was Always Me. And that's the book where Edward Wayne Edwards gets accused of almost every crime under the sun or in the darkness. And in this book, it's listing the features of Edward Wayne Edwards' life, personality, the way that he would have acted. And this is the book that starts out by saying that Edward Wayne Edwards committed the Black Dahlia murder when he was 13 years old. Ken Maines went off on his YouTube channel, Unsolved No More, talking about this, saying that the Black Dahlia murder was a surgical murder. Elizabeth Short was cut in half surgically, not like with a meat cleaver, but surgically. She was cut along her face with the Glasgow grin, beaten, and also her body was transported by a vehicle to the dump site in Leimert Park. And people are just thinking, was this really a 13-year-old? Well, it does state that in the introduction to John Cameron's book that they're claiming that he was 13 years old. Last year, I had the opportunity to appear on the panel discussion show that's available at Mysteries with Mr. Belchique. And there's another participant on the panel show named Shake Dog Shake, and he has a Zodiac killer suspect named Edward Wayne Edwards. And he said, no, Edward Wayne Edwards was not 13 years old at the time. He was 18 years old at the time. And that was because Edward Wayne Edwards used a fake birth certificate where he lied about his age, making himself appear 5 years younger. Was the Black Dahlia Avenger really 18 years old, the person who murdered Elizabeth Short? If anything about life can guide us, I would think that most likely not, because I would think that the Black Dahlia Avenger was someone who was a little bit older, someone who had a university education. And I know what John Cameron is trying to say, and other people who have Edward Wayne Edwards as a Zodiac Black Dahlia suspect, they want to be like, this guy was really smart, he was really self-taught, he knew about a lot of stuff, so he just kind of figured it all out. But even 13 to 18 years old, improbable. And Justice Talks True Crime is here. Hello, Justice. Just joining, so sorry if you've already covered, if this has already been covered, but what do you think about the two photos, allegedly, of Elizabeth Short that were in Hodell's possession? Well, Justice, firstly, welcome to True Crime on the phone. You get a cheers from Big Red. Big Red is joining us today. And Justice, I just want to say I really liked your appearance on the new channel, Zodiac Theory, that everybody should go over and subscribe to. Of course, subscribe to Black Box Online Radio, but also to Zodiac Theory and Dion Walker's channel. Lots of Zodiac content going around. Do I think the photos are authentic? No. And I first saw these photos on the television when I was like 16 years old. I was like, oh, well, maybe the Black Dahlia mystery has been solved. No, this is really just what Steve Odell wants you to think. They don't completely look like Elizabeth Short, and there are lots of stories going around. There are lots of rumors going around. I can tell you a rumor that I heard, and this isn't the most scholarly effort on my part, but it is that Steve Odell never had this moment when he was going through things in the attic and he found the photo of Elizabeth Short or two photos. He learned about the Black Dahlia mystery because of a family member. I'll just say it, because of his mother, and he didn't want to throw her under the bus, which might have been the only noble thing in the whole saga. So he had to provide some explanation about how he's putting all these things together and connecting the dots and understanding the situation. So he came up with the explanation of, oh, I have these two photos of Elizabeth Short. And most people, once this gets to the general public level, they're like, wait a second, these photos don't look alike. So then that kind of cast doubt on Steve Hodell's whole claim about George Hodell and this obsession with Elizabeth Short or knowing Elizabeth Short. And there's another Black Dahlia channel out there run by Larry Harnish. It's just called Larry Harnish, who is way more critical of Steve Hodell than I am, although Larry Harnish doesn't think so. He says Zodiac people are more critical of Steve Hodell, and he's just absolutely called Steve Hodell a fraud. And he was like, he knew the story was false from the beginning. He made the whole thing up. He did this to sell books. He did this to have a writing career. And I don't go to that level because at a certain point, we have to admit that we don't know what someone else is thinking. And all right, I'm so glad you asked this, Justice, because this really gives us a window into how other people think. So many times I thought, somebody's not going to believe a theory like that, that not only the father is the Zodiac killer, the Black Dahlia Avenger, but committing 25 murders between 1921, and who knows how late, 1999 or something like that. People actually do believe a lot of this stuff. Yokoso is here. Hello, Yokoso. If Zodiac did it, I'm sure he'd brag about it somehow. Well, Yokoso, we do have letters that came after the Black Dahlia case. The Black Dahlia Avenger is the name that came from the letters. And they're very, very skimpy. They don't resemble the Zodiac letters at all. And furthermore, one letter contained the belongings of Elizabeth Short. And with the exception of the Zodiac killer mailing the pieces of Paul Stein's shirt, the Zodiac really didn't mail a lot of physical evidence. And more importantly, the Zodiac killer did not mail the belongings of Paul Stein, such as the wallet and the keys. The driver's license of Paul Stein was not mailed. And furthermore, the Black Dahlia Avenger also doused the envelope in kerosene or gasoline or some other substance to destroy physical evidence. I repeat, if the same person wrote the Black Dahlia Avenger letter with Elizabeth Short's belongings and killed her, or was responsible in some way for her death and the cover-up and the transport, an extremely methodical killer is present. I think way more methodical than the Zodiac. And if I can also be very honest, I think that the Black Dahlia Avenger is like up here in terms of education and covering up crime scenes. The Zodiac is like right here on about the mid-level in terms of education and covering up crime scenes and methodical nature. We're just dealing with a more methodical, more sadistic, more twisted perpetrator, whereas the Zodiac is some just little bitch who gets his feelings hurt. I digress. All right, now Christopher Valdez says, there's no way those Hodel pics are Short. They look nothing like her. Right, upon close inspection, Christopher Valdez, the photos do not really look like Elizabeth Short, so we have to be there. Now, if anybody has seen the photos of Kenneth Lester German's girl, who they claim is Donna Lass, I would like to hear some feedback. Eddie J says, new subscriber here. Been watching your channel for a few months now. You are one of a kind, Ned. Thanks for all you do on the topic of true crime. Yes, okay. You got a cheers from Big Red. And Justice says, I think Zodiac people are more critical of Hodel as a suspect because he makes a lot worse suspect for the Zodiac than the Black Dahlia. Yes. Justice, George Hodel is, let's just flat out say it, I don't think the Zodiac was 61 years old. I don't think the Zodiac was a medical doctor. I don't think the Zodiac was somebody who sounded like he was 20 years old at Lake Berryessa. Like, was this 61-year-old, 62-year-old George Hodel? All I want's your money. I'm trying to get to Mexico. And Brian Hartnell not for once going to think that he's talking to a senior citizen, that Brian Hartnell's going to listen to that guy at Lake Berryessa and think, well, maybe he was 20 or 30 years old. Absolutely not. I mean, really, really, that's the where George Hodel comes into as a Zodiac killer suspect. Absolutely not. But there is a book that was written about him called Most Evil Part 2. As I said, Steve Hodel's books are interlocking. You have Black Dahlia Avenger and Most Evil, and the order goes Black Dahlia Avenger 1, Most Evil 1, Black Dahlia Avenger 2, Most Evil 2, Black Dahlia Avenger 3 and 4. And if we're going to talk rumors, the rumor is that Black Dahlia Avenger 5 will be coming out, but it's not a book. It's a stage play. So I can't wait to head over to Broadway to watch that, and I might actually do that. It's like it appears that there really is some type of exposure and that Steve Hodel is desiring with this. But if some people do that though, and they're not liars. This is another thing that I really wanted to reinforce. As I said, I found over time that a lot of people actually do believe what they're saying. And Evie says, "Hello, Ned." Hello, Evie. You got another cheers from Big Red. Welcome to True Crime on the Phone. Now, in terms of the Zodiac Killer Black Dahlia connection, Jack Torrance is also a suspect, and I looked at this one up just prior to the recording. Jack Torrance was 18 years old at the time. Oh, goodness, I don't know any math. No, I don't know any math. He was born in 1928. Elizabeth Short was murdered in 1947, so he would have been just shy of his 19th birthday. Oh, yes. He was 18 years old, about to turn 19, and he would have turned 20 the next year. So I think that that is something that is a big strike against Jack Torrance as well for being a Black Dahlia suspect, because we probably are looking with somebody who has at least a bachelor's degree in the sciences, or someone who has some type of work in maybe a butcher field. Jack Torrance was more famous for his time in the Navy and the Air Force. He was more famous for radio operations. And you guys all know the story about how his stepson, Dennis Kaufman, found the Lake Berryessa hood and a piece of electronic equipment that had a golden cross, not a white one, but a golden cross stitched into it. It was actually golden thread that was stitched into this hooded costume and a bloody knife. And he's saying, "Look, I found the Zodiac killer stuff. I mean, I think it is, but I don't know." Like he's just giving this dorky presentation. And some people actually bought it. They didn't get the con man vibes that I got. So then, this Jack Torrance thing really just expanded and expanded. But a big difference between the people who think that Jack Torrance was the Zodiac and Ed Edwards is the Zodiac is that the Jack Torrance followers are really in their own little world. There's a small group of people that make it into corners of the internet from time to time, but they're really just in their own world about how they've given into this concept of Jack Torrance being the Zodiac killer, and all of the information is contingent upon Dennis Kaufman telling the truth. Because if Dennis Kaufman lied, your investigation is over. Then you could just be like, you were deceived by a con man. And I don't like saying that. I mean, I don't want anybody to lie about their Zodiac killer suspect, but he would be an example of someone whom I believe was a blatant fraud. But I've also said that if there's a book out there, I'm going to talk about it. And one of the things that I've been thinking about discussing in the future was the Demon of the Southwest Wind, which is one Dennis Kaufman participated with, but he's not the primary author. The primary author is Stephen Dewhurst, and I just want to look at their observations. Maybe somebody can disprove some of them on the merits. And you also have to approach them with an open mind. Christopher Valdez says, both Majot and Hartnell describe the Zodiac as hefty. I don't think Hodel was ever described that way. He certainly doesn't look like that from the photographs, Christopher. And I just can't get over this, that 61-year-old George Hodel is going to tie up Ryan and Cecilia, and he's just going to leave them both alive to the point where they can actually talk to medical professionals and give witness statements. That doesn't sound like a medical doctor who's going to commit surgical murders. John Blues is here saying, hello, Ned, and hello, Ned Heads. Hello, John Blues. Justice says, I saw a study on age estimates based on voice, and when the man is speaking is older than 40, the voice estimates tend to be 10 to 12 to 20 years off and tend to be underestimates. With that said, I agree 61 is too old. Okay, well, I mean, Justice, I'll take your word for it. But you're saying that if the person is older than 40, then people are going to think that the estimation is 12 to 20 years off. All right, I'll take your word for it. That provides a little bit of leeway, but Brian said 20 to 30, though. Wait a second, Justice. 20 to 30. And George Hodel was 62 at the time. So that means that he should have estimated his voice at 42 maximum. That also would not necessarily fit. Evie says, that's true. I think Hodel is at least fairly convinced of his theory, but good point about people seeking exposure, not necessarily being liars. And also, Evie, people can want to put out books because they enjoy the experience. Some people might actually be trying to profit from it. But I mean, I've talked to a lot of people over the years that actually have a suspect, and I believe them when they say that this is their Zodiac suspect and that they are trying to just get the word out there. They're not lying. But yeah, some people do want to capitalize on it, and that's some real gray area stuff. And you can always say they're trying to be rewarded for their investigations, not for their relative being a murderer. But the worlds do coincide. So we have one from Justice. I also have to say that the hood Dennis Kaufman found was not neatly sewn at all. No, it wasn't, Justice. And it was my understanding that the real Lake Berryessa hood would have had a 3x3-inch white Zodiac cross that was sewn on with care and precision, whereas what Dennis Kaufman had was a much larger one. It looks well over 3x3, and it's gold. It's not even white. And he probably didn't know how to do it as neatly or elegantly as the Zodiac did, so that's why he fudged it by putting on the golden cross. Jim Marshall says, Jim Minshaw, sorry, Jim, I said Jim Marshall. Jim Minshaw says, good morning. Ned, have you ever seen The Mothman and or experienced Lost Time? Experienced Lost Time, perhaps. Now, I've only seen about 10 minutes of the Mothman Prophecies, the movie. It's with Richard Gere, and help me out, Jim. Is Deborah Messing the woman who's at the beginning? I saw the beginning section of it, and that's a real sin because I'm a West Virginian, and I should absolutely watch anything that's going to be related to the Mothman. Now, experiencing Lost Time, where certain like moments just sort of disappear. Yeah, I have experienced things like that, although not to that level. Christopher Valdez says Kaufman passed away a few years ago. Oh yes, absolutely. Dennis Kaufman has passed away, but I really don't I really don't think that he was going down the right track. Let's just say that. And it's not only that I think that, it was also Aphrodite Jones. If you go back to my interview with her last year, then she said very clearly, at first she was hearing him out, and then he wanted to write a book with Aphrodite Jones, and then she caught the con man vibes and stepped away. And a big thing about her is she seems like she's relatively aware when people are pulling her leg or jerking her around, and then it's just kind of hard to understand. But Evie, you said Indrid Cold. What do you mean by Indrid Cold? Because there was a listener to this program in the past named Indrid Cold. Please let me know. And Jim says, yes, that was Deborah Messing in the Mothman Prophecies. Now, I got to watch that movie at some point. Another thing, though, relation to time, I know this wasn't your direct comment, Jim, but I find the phantom time hypothesis to be extremely interesting, where it's like there could be irregularities between calendars, so certain years may be removed or missing from the timelines, and we're not actually in the year 2025. It's actually much earlier. Some people think that the entire quote-unquote dark ages did not happen, but in terms of like phantom time, this is on a personal level, and this isn't the lost time issue. I call the ages between 10 and 22 the years of phantom time for me. Really, it's the ages of 9 to 22. And this isn't Zodiac or Black Dahlia related. It's that when I was growing up, it's just those years are just an emotional blur. Like 9 to 22 years old, my emotions were different. My personality was different. I was thinking differently, feeling differently. And after the age of 22, things really began to change. It's almost like I just woke up one day. And Evie says, Indrid Cold is a reference to an eerie component of the Mothman case. Okay, there used to be a listener to this channel named Indrid Cold who told me that I was wrong about everything, and that this person was saying that they were some type of not exactly CIA operative, but something similar. And I'm like, well, all right, why don't you just tell me the truth then? I mean, if you're going to post publicly and say that all of my Zodiac observations are wrong, what are the right Zodiac killer observations? No, I can't tell you. I'm too high ranking. I'm up there with not the CIA, but like the CIA's brother, Christopher Valdez says named Aphrodite, mighty Aphrodite. Well, fair enough. But like I said, though, please, everybody, I hope that you will also check out Dion Walker's new video on the fingerprints, and I'll give you a preview. It means that we might actually have the Zodiac killer's fingerprints. And you're going to be thinking, didn't we always have the Zodiac killer's fingerprints? No, because as many of you know, the DNA evidence is questionable in the Zodiac killer case. So when it comes to identifying the perpetrator with hard forensic evidence, we would need something that is going to actually prove that this was the killer. And Dion Walker is closer and closer to getting this definitive link between something from the Steincab and one of the letters. And in the previous Dion Walker video, he talked very clearly about how there might actually, we'll just say in the little list letter, the Zodiac killer's little list letter is chock full of fingerprints. But he's closer and closer to identifying the exact similarities and the exact prints that could be on file, meaning that we would have the Zodiac killer's fingerprints. And if that's the case, then a lot of the widely discussed Zodiac killer suspects are going to be going down much further because some of them have been directly looked into. And he goes into this in great deal on his video. So please check out the latest Dion Walker video. Justice says, my point about the age estimate study is not simply to take Hartnell's age estimate as gospel. Unfortunately, I don't think we can rule anyone out on that. That is older than 20 or younger than 50. Okay. So then, Justice, out of curiosity, I know I'm the host, but I'm going to ask you this. What would you make of a suspect like Shel Cavalli or John Parr Cox, who was 50 years old, someone who would be so borderline in that way? Do you think that they deserve strong consideration? Or are they just kind of like teetering right on the edge when they're just about to fall out? And the same could be said for 20-year-old suspects. Now, I totally get what you mean that voice estimations aren't going to be perfect and that it's going to be rather easy to misstate someone. But this is a challenge that was brought up by Larry Harnish on his show when he's like, Steve Hodel has never even proven that George Hodel was in San Francisco in 1968 and 69. And I think that that's a very bold statement. I've always just accepted it because he's definitely in the Philippines in 1967, because this is how the George Hodel timeline works. First, he's in California, in Southern California, and in 1949, his daughter Tamar Hodel accused him of sexual assault, and there's a trial and everything, and he was acquitted and found not guilty. But he still has, this damaged reputation. So he goes to Hawaii. Everybody talks about him going to, the Pacific, somewhere in the islands. First, it's Hawaii. Then, after staying in Hawaii for a while, he goes to the Philippines. And even according to Steve Hodel, he's there until 1967, when the murder of Lucilla Lalou takes place. She was the original Chop Chop lady. I have a standalone episode about her. And at that point, she was decapitated and her body and limbs were cut apart, and it was 500 meters, from a street named Zodiac. And it's the whole concept of how George Hodel would be committing murders around the world and then taking information from street signs and place names and incorporating them into his future murders. So he's just kind of constantly shifting and evolving. Possible, but highly unlikely. Evie says, I like Mike Rodelli quite a bit, but I can't say the same for his suspect. Well, Mike Rodelli is not backing down, and I think he's really convinced a lot of people that Shel Cavalli was the Zodiac killer, one of which is Gerald Gregory Doan, who wrote a book called Flirting with the Executioner. And Mike Rodelli is, persuading quite a few individuals. Justice says, I think that Cavalli is pushing it on age. He's not my favorite suspect, but all respect to Rodelli's research. John Parr Cox was way too tall, and more importantly, he had gray and white hair. Yes. And, the physical appearance, the physical stature, the physical nature of John Parr Cox mostly is a disqualification in my book, but, that's just me. And as far as Shel Cavalli, though, I posted about him in a group today called the Zodiac Killer Library, which you can follow on Facebook. And mostly, I was just putting that stuff out there because everything I just told you, I recognize that he is a suspect that's going to become more and more popular. And I do have to admit, they have this one photo of Cavalli where it's darkened. It's intentionally darkened, but he does heavily resemble the composite sketch of the Zodiac with the glasses and everything. Most of the photos that we see of Shel Cavalli are from his later years in life when he is, a real senior citizen. Although he would have been 50 years old at the time, and I think 50 years old is really pushing it. And I don't know what Justice thinks about this. It's just I have a hard time accepting that the Lake Berryessa stabber was 50 years old. Even the Blue Rock Springs shooter seems like they're just talking about a younger person. But I also always say, in contrast, that when you take the composite sketch after the Presidio Heights shooting and you colorize it, animate it, bring it to life with AI, it looks like someone who's over 40. But there's a big difference between being 40 and being 50. And I'm 37, by the way. I guess you guys can tell the gray hair is finally starting to seep in. I went for years without it. Some people I know who are my age are just completely gray everywhere. A lot of them had blonde hair to begin with, but all of these aging things affect people differently. But I was really, starting this episode out by talking about Edward Wayne Edwards, John Parr Cox, and Jack Torrance. With Ed Edwards, he is a suspect that really was a nationwide serial killer. And I think that is something that just furthers this case about how John Cameron can always provide an explanation for how and why crimes happened, about locations. Well, he's a nationwide serial killer. He went all over the country. He committed crimes in Florida, Ohio, and Montana, and he went to California. Like, he can just always shift the narrative because Edward Wayne Edwards was in multiple places. And it's not impossible for a serial killer to commit crimes in multiple places. Look at Tommy Lynn Sells, the brutal Texan, the coast-to-coast killer, Joseph Paul Franklin, who is another Zodiac killer suspect. They were traveling serial killers. And with Edward Wayne Edwards, though, some things are hard to accept. For example, I'm reading through this book, the early sections of It Was Always Me, and it talks about the Kalitsky Bogle murders from 1956. Where there are two people that were abducted at a lover's lane. One of them is killed and left there, and then the female victim was abducted, murdered, and her body was found 2 or 3 days later. One of the victims had their hands tied behind their back with a belt, and it appears that John Cameron is trying to pass this off as an Edwards murder. And there's always going to be the fail-safe that, oh yeah, even if there is contradictory evidence, well, Edward Wayne Edwards was somebody who liked to blame other people and plant false evidence on other people. This murder is also discussed in the book 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified by Tim Spencer. That's how I learned about it the first time. And when I discussed Tim Spencer's book on my channel in 2023, that was one of the biggest things that I was discussing because it was a new story for me. And I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, well, this is some new information. Let's see. Did the Zodiac killer commit the Kalitsky Bogle murders in Montana 1956? Well, no, because DNA evidence linked somebody else to the crimes. And it was semen DNA. Semen DNA was left behind, and that was from an individual named Kenneth Gould. Even if Edward Wayne Edwards was a very crafty and methodical serial killer, was he really planting somebody else's semen at the crime scene? Probably not. Probably not. And something like that would really be a big strike against it. And I was so surprised, though, because when I downloaded Tim Spencer's book, I got the, like before I read a book, I get the free sample off of Kindle. And I was just reading through it. And almost the whole sample was about the Kalitsky Bogle murders. And I was just thinking, whoa, whoa, whoa. What? You're still kind of pushing this narrative that Edward Wayne Edwards did it when somebody else has been proven to be the killer with DNA. I can't say convicted because Kenneth Gould passed away before he could have been convicted. But that appears to have been the problem. Now, I've had the opportunity to interview Tim Spencer, and some of you might remember my interview with him if you listen to Zodiac Mondays. One more time, he's the author of 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified, and his claim is that the Z408 cipher 100% came from Edward Wayne Edwards because he used that to reveal his identity. In 1972, Edward Wayne Edwards wrote a book called The Metamorphosis of a Criminal when he said that his first prison number was his identity, and the prison number was 33245. And what Tim Spencer believes is that Edward Wayne Edwards was thinking, you know what? I'm going to give my identity, but I'm not going to say it directly. It's all going to have personal meaning to him. It's all going to have hallmarks that he created. So he's going to include the number, his identity, 33245, into the construction of the 408. And it was divided into 3 segments. It was sent to 3 newspapers, 24 characters down, and 5 for the letter E, the 5th letter of the alphabet. 33245 totals to 17, and it's 17 across, 17 by 24, 33245. And to anybody who criticized me for bringing him on and they're saying, we don't want to hear about this stuff. We don't want to hear about these things. I'm just like, his numbers do check out. To say that he is lying or that he is misrepresenting something, or just to say that you don't like it, well, his numbers check out. And I've always said, if somebody has written a book about it, I will talk about their material. The challenge is, I also just can't accept that actually is what the Zodiac is thinking, because that's bordering on mind reading. And it's not like a very simple explanation when you're like, all right, well, you combine these 3 parts of the cipher and this person's name is written vertically. No, this is very specific info. And the number's not even there. It's the construction of the cipher. So ultimately, that's probably going into the category of probably not. No, I've been criticized in the recent months for some of the guests that I've had on Zodiac Monday. One of them was Tim Spencer, and another one was James Big Twin, who wrote the book, The Only Time Richard Got Angry at Me. And, it's a fascinating book, and I think the book turned out a little bit better than his presentation on Black Box Online Radio. And he claims that one of his finds is that in a newspaper that firstly, that somebody was writing articles in a newspaper using the name Dick Geikie, which was most likely Richard Gaikowski. For all intents and purposes, there's a high chance it was Richard Gaikowski. I mean, you've just based on the similarity of the names, and Geik was a writer. But then you have this blemish in one of the articles where there's a smudge or there's like a circle ovular shape on one page, and if you put it on top of the next page, it highlights the words the Zodiac. And there's also a review of an album called The Electric Zodiac, and the word electric is removed, and you have just the words the Zodiac. Dick Geikie, the Zodiac, the Zodiac. And all of the people in the comment section were just like, Ned, why'd you bring this guy on? Why are you even talking about this stuff? This is silly. My response is, wait a second. If Richard Gaikowski actually were the Zodiac killer, then everything that he is saying goes up. Everything that he is saying is legitimate, or there's a very high chance that it's accurate, but that is something that is suspect relevant. And I would never say that something like that is wrong. And I even thought that people were overly harsh in the comments section. That's not even dealing with mind reading at that point. That would actually be a series of clues where somebody would be hiding their identity in plain sight. But let's say hypothetically, okay, it turns out that everybody got duped and it was Arthur Lee Allen the whole time. Then this Dick Geikie stuff, the oval around the Zodiac in one of his articles, that would be a lot less valuable, right? Then you'd be like, oh yeah, it's probably just a misinterpretation of the evidence. That's a suspect relevant thing. And I've really found, though, that out of all the suspects that I've been talking to you guys about, and really, let's focus on the 3 Black Dahlia Zodiac suspects, George Hodel, Edward Wayne Edwards, and Jack Torrance. I would put Edward Wayne Edwards as the most viable of those 3. And that is because Edward Wayne Edwards was a real serial killer that targeted lovers' lanes, and he was a real lifelong criminal. And to the credit of that book that I was talking about, It Was Always Me, they list off the crimes and arrests and illegal behaviors of Edward Wayne Edwards, not the ones that are all hypothetical, like killing JonBenet Ramsey, no, but the things he was arrested for. And also his, what do you call them in prison? Like citations or, not citations, his disciplinary actions in prison and so on, stuff that has more documentation. That's real criminal deviance. Then you would have somebody like George Hodel, who was perhaps a criminal. And Larry Harnish even goes into some detail about how George Hodel might not even have committed the sexual assault on his daughter, Tamara Hodel. She may have made the whole thing up because she was a chronic and habitual liar, and she had a lot of other teenage issues and so on. George Hodel is a shady person. There's a reason why he was put under surveillance for the Black Dahlia murder for 5 weeks. They didn't find anything, so they let him go, or that they no longer investigated him or looked into him. He was not the prime suspect, but he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia case. Then at the bottom of the barrel, you have Jack Torrance, because I just believe that Jack Torrance is somebody who is most likely a victim of fraud, that Dennis Kaufman made the whole thing up. And one of the biggest points in favor of Dennis Kaufman being a fraud is that he claimed he had photos of the crime scenes, and when he put the actual pictures up, they were just small blurry images, and no one could understand what was going on, or no one could make any sense of it, and like you just couldn't see clearly what was there. That's a con man tactic, and it's a shameful con man tactic. And at the absolute bottom of the barrel, we have Frank Morris and the Lizard People. Now, I really should call them Frank Morris and the Anglin Brothers. I borrowed that from a different show, The Cooper Vortex, where anytime you mention David Gold's My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, we're referring to the perpetrators as Frank Morris and the Lizard People, committing the Phantom Killings, the Black Dahlia murder, the escape from Alcatraz, the Zodiac murders, and of course, D.B. Cooper. And they also murdered 19,000 other people. I'm not even joking. That's the theory. And that just goes into the category of that is so extreme and so far out and so ridiculous that it's perhaps not worth strongly considering. Now, in terms of the recent guests that I've had on Black Box Online Radio, I've mentioned Tim Spencer and his book 55 The Zodiac Killer Identified. I also did mention James Big Twins, The Only Time Richard Got Angry at Me. But one of the other books that I've discussed recently was the Zodiac Killer, Murderers in History, Ciphers, and Crimes. And I had the opportunity to interview C.G. Karras. And I also did a suspect profile episode on his prime suspect, George Caradanis. He's known as Gio Caradanis, actually. And a lot of people were, again, very critical of that interview. But I still say, in the last 12 months, maybe the most creative true crime book that I've read was The Zodiac Killer, Murderers in History, Ciphers, and Crimes. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying that his theory is correct. He has 4 participants in the Zodiac murders, and I don't necessarily agree with that. But it's the most creative and thoughtful book about the Zodiac that I've read in the last 12 months. And some people had a very big exception to this part here. They didn't like a particular detail of the theory, and that involves the Lake Herman Road murders. And that you have these 4 participants, right? One of them's not present at Lake Herman Road, so you would have Lawrence Kane, Xenophon Anthony, and George Caradanis. And one of the finds of C.G. Karras, I believe he's the first person to find this, maybe someone else did, but he may have found it, is that there was somebody who knew both Xenophon Anthony and Lawrence Kane, 2 other Zodiac killer suspects, and his name was George Caradanis. He knew Xenophon Anthony because of, Greek neighborhoods and Greco-Turkish friendships, and Lawrence Kane because of the real estate sector. And they had this mutual person of acquaintanceship. So at Lake Herman Road, there are these 3 guys, and that 2 of them held Betty Lou Jensen's arms wide open, spread eagle, and that most likely George Caradanis fired the gunshot that killed Betty Lou Jensen. And with that theory, so many people were saying that that's impossible. Who on earth would take the risk that somebody is going to be holding a person's arms wide open, one man on each side of her, and they're just going to be pulling the arms out while somebody's firing a 22 caliber firearm? That's crazy. Would somebody do that? Like, would I do that? Well, no, because I don't kill people. But if I did, no, not even joking. Not even joking. But would other people do that? Yes. And I don't know if you guys ever watched The Masked Magician growing up, but I did. And he even revealed one of the gunshot magic tricks about how you shoot a bullet and the magician catches it in his or her teeth, and how it's all done with trickery. They're not actually firing the bullet. But he said in the past, the narrator did, that 17 magicians ended up dead because they actually would ask somebody to shoot a real bullet through a pane of glass and miss the magician, and then that person would just be like, and just insert a bullet into their teeth. One of them was named Chingling Su, and he was a Caucasian white guy who pretended to be Chinese, and he's actually featured in the story Dandelion Wine, the book Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. That's how I learned about him, and I connected the dots because, oh, he was one of the people the Masked Magician was discussing on the program. People do things like that. That's not beyond belief. But one thing that I would put in the category of beyond belief or not, I mean, let's just rephrase this. Some things are beyond belief, some things are not beyond belief, and some things are evidence-based. And one thing I love about you guys on Black Box Online Radio is you love the evidence-based material. You love those things. And when I was talking to Tim Spencer, he was saying that he thought that Edward Wayne Edwards committed the Lake Herman Road murders because he was trying to frame a different individual named Frank Dryman Valentine, and that Frank Dryman Valentine was paroled in December of 1968 to go to Vallejo, California to work with his brother or a relative, and he didn't actually get there until January of 1969, so that's a complication. But Edward Wayne Edwards knew about Frank Dryman Valentine. He knew that he was paroled, so he wanted to frame him by committing a double homicide and blaming it on Frank Dryman. So he did this the way that Frank Dryman committed the murder that sent him to jail, the murder of Clarence Pellet. Shooting somebody 5 times, Betty Lou Jensen, the way that he shot Clarence Pellet 5 or 6 times, and he shoots Clarence Pellet 6 times, I believe. He shoots him once, then he stands over the body and fires the gun 5 times into Clarence Pellet's body in Montana years ago. That was in the 1950s. What's the problem? What's the problem? I see we got 24 people in the chat. Can you tell me the problem with that? What's the problem at Lake Herman Road murder with the Lake Herman Road murders? Why doesn't that work? Why does that not make sense? Betty Lou Jensen was not shot 5 times with the gunman standing over her. That's what I say. She was shot running away. That's the thing about everything I said in relation to this theory involving George Coronanis and having her arms held open. She was not shot when she was on her back on the ground. She was not shot face down. She was shot while standing up. So if this person, Edward Wayne Edwards, is going to try to frame Frank Dryman Valentine for this murder, then he did a rather terrible job of making it look identical. They had to cut out the earth 6 inches deep underneath Clarence Pellet's body to recover the bullets. Frank Dryman was standing over top Clarence Pellet. Very, very different type of crime. But in terms of how these theories are arranged, we may never know the truth. Is somebody getting like a little bit of an inkling of the truth? Maybe. Are some people onto some things? Sure. Is it interesting to study the time period? Yes, I think so. But does that necessarily mean we're getting closer to the Zodiac's identity? I think the stuff that Dion Walker is doing is getting closer to the Zodiac's identity. And furthermore, do you guys notice some problems with the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection? Do you notice certain problems? The Black Dahlia Avenger was an extremely hands-on and physical killer, and the Zodiac was not. The Black Dahlia Avenger was somebody who cleaned the body of the victim, scrubbing her body with a brush and leaving bristles behind. Maybe her body was refrigerated, draining the blood from the body. That could even be why she was bisected, to fit into a bathtub. Yeah, the Zodiac didn't do any of that stuff. And if you want to participate in the chat, can I just ask you something? I've gone through many different theories in this episode, but do you think that this Black Dahlia Avenger connection is the desire for people to take two true crime cases and unite them together? And they're uniting them together simply based on the fact that they both happened in California and they both involve letters, the Black Dahlia Avenger letters and the Zodiac letters. Is that all this is? You can let me know in the chat what you think. And I would really hope that there's something more than that, because in terms of connections, we have 21 years in between the Black Dahlia murder and the Zodiac murders. It's almost 22 years. January of 47 to December of 68. Different time periods, different MOs, different signatures, different personas. And also, somebody already brought this up in the comment section, like here in the chat for this episode. No direct admission from the Zodiac when the Zodiac provided direct admissions to other crimes. And when I talk about these subjects, some people tend to think that I'm just being overly dismissive, that I'm just, being a naysayer. And I don't want it to be like that. I want to really approach this and share what I genuinely think, also by discussing some of the evidence, the facts of the case. But I think that the facts are pointing away from a Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. Let me know what you think down here, and let me know what you think about the suspects that have been discussed: Edward Wayne Edwards, George Hodel, Jack Torrance, Frank Morris, and even some of the other suspects from the different theories, like Xenophon Anthony, Lawrence Kane, George Karadanis, and Richard Gaikowski. Let me know what you think about that in the chat. As always, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. But in terms of where Dahlia Thursday is going, I've been going through the book Severed by John Gilmore, and next week, hopefully, I'll be releasing a new segment in that particular series. Then I'm really going to try and sink my teeth into the book Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pugh Eatwell, which is going to focus on Leslie Dillon as a Black Dahlia suspect. Already, though, there are some imperfections in that book, and I'm a novice to the Black Dahlia case. I don't even believe this. I don't know how this is true. I just kind of blinked, and I've been following the Zodiac case for 9 years, and I don't really know that much about it. That's one thing. But I've been doing the Black Dahlia case for 2.5 months. And so when I notice certain errors that stand out, I kind of feel a little bit differently about it, and I just don't really feel the best when someone's publishing a book on the subject. But after Severed and Black Dahlia Red Rose, I really want to go through the Black Dahlia in Hollywood with a fine-tooth comb, because that's the website that has arranged their chapters. It's a website that has arranged the book in chapter-like formats. And I just really want to see where that one goes, because it seems like it's highly regarded by some. Of course, Larry Harnish doesn't like it, but he doesn't seem to like anything. And he doesn't even like me. But, if I've made a few enemies, that probably means that I'm doing something right. Well, this episode of True Crime on the Phone is coming to an end. You guys can put anything you want in the comment section, anything in the chat. You can share anything that you want. And tomorrow is Cooper Friday. I will be with you for an episode about D.B. Cooper. And I hope that I haven't missed anything in the chat. I think that it's right here. And if you just want to leave any final things in the last 2 minutes. But yes, please tune in tomorrow for a new episode about D.B. Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio. And I'm working on something that will be a bonus episode, which I'm not sure when I'm going to release it, but it's about Jack the Ripper. Every Wednesday is Ripper Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio. And overall, though, I'm really hoping to just keep the Jack the Ripper discussions going. And I want to, just digest the material as well as I can. I've been following a lot of the contemporary videos about Jack the Ripper for that segment, but I want to get back to the books and back to the suspect profiles and look at some things that were really the heart and soul of Ripper Wednesday, analyzing the suspects and the evidence and everything of the sort. And the chat's been a little bit cold for a while, so I hope you guys have been able to post and respond. I haven't seen anything new come up recently. Other than that, though, I'm going to say have a wonderful day, and I will be with you tomorrow for an episode about DB Cooper, and of course, on Monday for a new Zodiac Killer news report. And I said this on my last episode of True Crime on the Phone. I don't really know how to end the episode. Let's see if I can do this right. I probably should be saying goodbye to you, so I'm going to say goodbye.